What's going on, guys? Reisshub back with another video. This time I'm covering Gooboz, Worthy, and Jynx, and their win from the Lachy Cup. Big shout out to Gooboz, who gave some of his time up to answer some of my questions about the games, so this video is going to be sprinkled with his little insights all the way through it, so big thanks to him. So these guys drop Authority, and the reason for this is because it's center map and it guarantees them a launchpad. Gooboz also said that they've been dropping Agency ever since it came out, so they're really comfortable with this spot. And that really shows in their fighting skills here. They actually prefer to be contested by one or two teams, as they're so confident in fighting that they know they're going to win this off spawn 99% of the time. If you're a great fighter, maybe you could land at one of these POIs too, but if you're not, maybe go for a little bit of a safer route. So in each game they dropped in slightly different spots depending on who was contesting them and who had the better drop. However, it was very clear that they tried to get control of the basement very early on. This gives them guaranteed shield from the shield barrels, and they're really comfortable fighting down here since they've been doing it for so long. The most important thing to note about their early game fights is their fantastic spacing. They're always there to back each other up when they need each other. They're also fantastic fighters individually, and by themselves they win a lot of their 1v1 fights. Having spacing that's really good also enables you to pinch really effectively, which is something they do multiple times throughout the tournament. When you stick so close to one of your opponents, he almost doesn't even need to comm anything to you because you can already see it anyway. This allows you to set up a pinch so easy because you can already see what your teammate's doing, so you can quite simply go around the other side and pick up an easy elimination. Once they'd cleared out the spawn, which they did in every game except for one, they ensured that they'd harvested maximum hard materials before they left. Jynx also used the grappler to quickly loot the outside chests around Authority. This trio is a perfect example of how each player has a specific role within the trio. Now, setting specific roles is something that a lot of pro players disagree on and say that they don't really do, which is fair enough, it's whatever works for your team. However, this trio is very clearly cut out. Jynx is always the one who's up front, tarping ahead. Gooboz is second, and he's the IGL, he's making the calls, and if you watch recordings, 90% of the voices you can hear are his. Then you've got Worthy, who sits at the back of the tarp, who wins so many fights and is a crucial part of this trio, picking up so many impact frags to continue to get these guys moving in the end games. These guys' loadouts also reflect their roles. As the guy who's going to be leading, Jynx always takes the grapple. This allows him to get power positions earlier on in the rotates and then help his teammates get up into those positions later on. Gooboz nearly always takes the sniper, so he can scout and get easy tags and easy eliminations at distance with this. Since Worthy is at the back, always going for frags, he took either the P90 or the drum gun. It makes sense since he's going to be at the back, just going for eliminations over and over, sitting in the tarp, that he has the highest DPS weapons. In your trio, roles don't have to be super specific, they don't have to be concrete. Anyone can do any role. However, if you have players who are better at one role, for example one player who's constantly getting more eliminations than the rest, it makes sense to put him at the back of the tarp and let him do his thing that he does best. Like the majority of teams that we're seeing now, the mid game was not very exciting. These guys weren't W keying, they weren't being anything overly aggressive, all they were doing is just focusing on the rotate and taking shots as they need to. They only really took fights when they downed an opponent already or knew they had a significant HP advantage. Like most other winning teams that I've VOD reviewed so far, this team focused on rotating early and getting into natural high ground positions or in areas where they could harvest out buildings to replenish their materials. Ideally, they were aiming to get as centered as possible in the third zone in particular, along with these other prerequisites as well. For the 3 games that they won, being centered of third zone was a huge factor in their success, as they didn't need to rotate at all to fourth zone, which conserved them a large amount of materials. Conserving materials was also a huge part of their strategy. This team always makes it to endgame without being scuffed and with great materials. So I asked Gooboz about this. He said that a lot of people overbuild early on and waste a lot of materials in the earlier zones. And just being a little bit more careful in the earlier zones with the mats that you use can save you a couple hundred for the endgame, which can make all the difference. The first element to this is to always refarm what you use. And in the early game and mid game, using wood when you don't need to use any hard materials is an absolute must do. Once you've used it, easily refarm it straight away and keep those materials high. Because of this, and simply just not overbuilding in general, on the 3 games that they won, they had an average of 130 materials each going into the moving zones. In game 1, they've already established a high ground position in the 4th zone, on the edge of this hill. They did this by rotating early to the center of 3rd zone, which gave them a really easy 4th zone rotate. When the 5th zone appears, notice how Jynx immediately grapples over there to ensure that he has height over the team that's already got positioned. Before the zone even appears, they already know how and when they're going to rotate, and they discussed this prior to that. So as soon as the zone appears, Jynx already knows that he needs to immediately grapple over, secure height on that hill, and then his teammates will follow. Once they've claimed this area, Gooboz notices that there's another layer in zone on the pylon that'll be equal height. To prevent another team contesting it, Jynx uses the grapple to get over here. Ordinarily, being this split would be really questionable, but since Jynx has the grappler, he can just use one grapple shot to get back over if he has any problems. This means that he can help protect Gooboz and Worthy from this angle by beaming players who are trying to contest their height, giving them many more opportunities to get eliminations at this point in the game. If they had allowed another team to contest this height, and then this team had gotten the first moving, this would mean that Jynx, Worthy and Gooboz would lose height and they would have to try and retake it in the moving zones, which is obviously much more difficult than just maintaining it all the way through moving. This was a really great play, but it's only really something you can do if you have the grappler or the shockwave launcher. The first moving zone ends up being behind the original base that they had built. So as soon as that shows up, it's really simple, Jynx just grapples back over. Notice how Gooboz goes all the way up onto the hill to ensure that they've secured ultimate high. When you're going over mountains and old builds like this, you need to have one player ensure that they have secured high ground like Gooboz has done right here. Then, once it starts to descend down the other side of the hill, notice how Worthy is staying up a little bit higher. This is a really common strategy used in duos, trios and squads, where you have one player single tarping on a single bit of wood above them just to ensure that they're extra safe and that someone can't steal height as easily from you. From then on, it's a pretty easy win where Jynx is the one tarping ahead, Gooboz behind him, and Worthy just spraying down from above or on the same level when they get to low materials, and this allows them to pick up a very easy victory royale for them. Their second victory, which was game 4, they again went to the center of third zone, and then they got the fourth and then the fifth zone as well. Since they're in lazy, they were just farming out the buildings there and replenishing their materials, ensuring they had enough for the moving zones. It was clear early on that they had a strategy to go to the dead side of the zone as there was a building there which was equal height. This is similar to the last game where they were looking for alternative ways to take height that were really free. They ended up getting on top of this building, but the 6th zone ended up being at max distance. This wasn't a problem though, since they had already created a tunnel to get all the way to this side of the zone, so they simply just walked back through it. Since they had 3 pads this game, they used one here and tried to land as far forward as possible on a mid-ground layer, which is consistent in what we've seen in most metas and in most game modes, solos, trios and squads. Doesn't really matter, everyone's always trying to land as far forward as they can and on a mid-ground layer that's relatively safe. Then we see that similar formation where each player takes up their roles, where Jynx is at the front, tarping and getting ahead as possible, Gooboz is in the middle, IGLing, and then Worthy is the back, just slaying out as always. Then use one of their other pads that they have available to get ahead of the zone. This is a great example of why being ahead of the zone is so beneficial for your team, even for the tarper. Jynx can tunnel slowly and be quite careful as he does it, and he notices above him there's an enemy player with his floor open. If he had just tunneled mindlessly going straight forward, he probably would have been killed here by the players above. However, because he was ahead of the zone, he could take his time a little bit more and he easily spotted this and they avoided getting killed at this point. While rotating, they are constantly looking for opportunities to take height by looking through the flats that they place above them. When they see an opportunity, they all simultaneously push for height. Jynx grapples, while Gooboz and Worthy both crank individually, from different angles, so there's a much greater chance of them getting height. Both Jynx and Worthy pick up eliminations on one of the players who's up on the high ground, however Worthy gets eliminated by one as well. This means that it's a 2v1 against the guys on height, and it's pretty easy to secure it from here on out. This height retake worked because all 3 of them simultaneously went up for height at the same time, but also on top of that, they each won their individual fights. A lot of intermediate competitive players love playing trios and duos and hate playing solos. However, in team modes, it's still so important that you can win a huge amount of your 1v1s. For example, Gooboz even says that Worthy wins 99% of his fights. This is one of the reasons why I think everyone should be practicing solos, and in particular fighting in solos, just because it makes you so much more reliable when you go to play a team mode. In their third victory, which was game 8, again they were centered of the 3rd zone, they got the 4th zone, but then again they got the 5th zone, so quite lucky this time. However, it wasn't all good luck, because then they got nade stranded by the opposing height. Unfortunately, Jynx gets knocked by this, and they have to use a large amount of materials to rebuild the base that they had, obviously losing height at the same time. Thankfully, they do manage to get the res off, however. In the first moving zones, this is where they use their only launch pad. Again, they land far ahead and get up a layer so that they're not on the ground, and continue to tunnel in as far as they can. First interesting thing here is, as Jynx is ahead, he's not breaking through these builds with his pickaxe, he's actually doing this with his weapons. This is because all of these builds are in enemy territory, and he has no idea if there's anyone lurking in these builds or not. Doing this with his weapons allows him to keep a little bit of extra distance and be extra safe. Also, look at the direction that they're going to tarp. Jynx is leading them to the right hand side of the zone. Notice how all he needs to do is place 2 floors, one above, one below, and then a wall to the left, leaving the right side completely open. This is an absolutely ideal spot to tarp on if you're not on high ground in a congested zone. This is because there's going to be so many players in the center rotating through that way that it's highly likely that you're going to run into another team and get eliminated. Staying at the edge this way allows you to stay further away from the other players, rotating with less danger, and have great angles to shoot at other opponents, all whilst using less materials to tunnel. And as always, he's trying to get them as far ahead of zone as possible for pretty much all of the same reasons as he's trying to get to the right hand side. Once they get a little bit deeper into the zone, notice their spacing. These guys do a fantastic job of sticking close to each other, so when an opportunity arises to pick up an elimination, they're all there to support each other, ensuring that these eliminations are picked up easily and fast. Sticking this close together also has allowed them to all stay alive until the end game. Despite the fact that they're in a disadvantaged position being on low ground, they still manage to win their individual 1v1s like I said earlier and pick up an easy victory royale. In your endgames, you really need to be aware of how close you stay to your teammates. If you're on a safe layer with plenty of space and plenty of builds in front of you, you can afford to split out a little bit more. However, if you're in a really scuffed situation and you need some impact frags, ensure that you're sticking as close together as possible to ensure you can each support each other in your fights. That's all for this video on Gooboz, Worthy and Jynx. Again, thank you very much to Gooboz for giving me his insights in the Twitter DMs. Hope you guys enjoyed this video. Back with the VOD reviews now that there are tournament replays back, so hope you guys enjoyed this. Much more to come. Catch you guys later. Hope you have a good one. See ya.